In the face of Russia's war on Ukraine, the West appears largely impotent. That's not because they're underestimating Putin. In a press conference as Russian troops entered Kiev, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg gave this warning.
Yesterday, NATO allies activated our defense plans. And as a result, we are deploying elements of the NATO response force on land, at sea, and in the air to further strengthen our posture and to respond quickly to any contingency. The United States, Canada, and European allies have deployed thousands of more troops to the eastern part of the alliance. We have over 100 jets at high alert operating in over 30 different locations, and over 120 ships from the high north to the Mediterranean. The Kremlin's objectives are not limited to Ukraine. Russia has demanded legally binding agreements to announce further NATO enlargement and to remove troops and infrastructure from allies that joined after 1997. We are facing a new normal in European security, where Russia openly contests the European security order and uses force to pursue its objectives. The world will hold Russia and Belarus accountable for their actions.
The West's dire warnings and strong warnings against Vladimir Putin have come with warm words to their allies. President Joe Biden had a Friday phone call with President Zelensky. Afterwards, Zelensky tweeted, "Strengthening sanctions, concrete defense assistance, and an anti-war coalition have just been discussed with POTUS," that's the President of the United States, "grateful to America for the strong support to Ukraine." Now, reading that, of course, you never really know if a foreign president is actually happy when they say it's been a good call. It's obviously a diplomatic faux pas to put down the phone and say, that was rubbish, I didn't get anything I needed. But my instant reaction from reading that is, what is an anti-war coalition? There was never going to be a coalition that was going to fight Russia here. And I don't think there should have been. But now we just see these endless headlines. Thousands of troops have moved to Estonia. Thousands of troops have moved from Britain to Eastern Europe. So what, right? None of them are going to go to Ukraine, which is where they would be needed. Now, as I say, I'm not saying they should go to Ukraine because I think that could risk World War III. But the problem for me is if you have a military organization which talks tougher than it acts, then you encourage a country like Ukraine to not compromise with Russia. Obviously, we're in a completely different situation now. There's not much point in trying to compromise now. Russia is, it's an awful imperialist war. But I do feel like NATO have potentially led Ukraine down the garden path here. And now when they're in their time of greatest need, which I do think they're partly in because of the decisions, because of the behavior of NATO, now you get just these warm words and not much else. Now, all this means, of course, without wanting to commit troops, the West are relying on economic measures to try to pressure Putin. This was Joe Biden announcing renewed sanctions.
I just spoke with the G7 leaders this morning, and we're in full and total agreement. We will limit Russia's ability to do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen to be part of the global economy. We'll limit their ability to do that. We're going to stunt the ability to finance and grow the Russian military. We're going to impose and we're going to impair their ability to compete in high-tech 21st century economy. We've already seen the impact of our actions on Russia's currency and the ruble, which early today hit its weakest level ever in history. The Russia stock market plunged today. The Russian government borrowing rate spiked by over 15%. In today's actions, we've now sanctioned Russian banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. We've cut off Russia's largest bank, a bank that holds more than 1/3 of Russia's banking assets by itself, cut it off from the U.S. financial system. And today, we're also blocking 4 more major banks. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen. This includes VTB, the second largest bank in Russia, which has $250 billion in assets.
So the sanctions aim to stop Russians doing business with US banks, completely blocking them from access to the United States financial system. Now, this sounds good. Sounds like a big, strong move taken there by Joe Biden, but there is a problem. Russia's main export is energy, and energy, in all of these sanctions, gets an opt-out, right? With our inkling this would happen already. Alberto Nardelli and Arnie Dels reported this in January for Bloomberg. The German government has pushed for an exemption for the energy sector if there is a move to block Russian banks from clearing US dollar transactions, according to documents seen by Bloomberg. People familiar with recent discussions said other major Western European nations hold similar views. One official said that conversations since the documents were circulated suggest the exemption is likely to be part of a final package of penalties agreed with the US that would be deployed in the event that Moscow invaded Ukraine. So that's what was written in January. That's what's happened now. There was what sounds on the face of it like a very aggressive package of sanctions, but it has an opt-out for Russia's main export. Right? There's not much point in having a package of sanctions if you give an opt-out to their main export. We can look at the numbers. Why does this matter? Bloomberg have reported that in the 24 hours after Vladimir Putin signed a decree recognizing 2 breakaway Ukrainian territories, the European Union, the UK, and the US bought a combined 3.5 million barrels of Russian oil and refined products worth more than $350 million at current prices. On top of that, the West probably bought another $250 million worth of Russian natural gas, plus tens of millions of dollars of aluminium, coal, nickel, titanium, gold, and other commodities. In total, the bill likely topped $700 million. We've got the West talking tough. Yes, of course, we're not going to go in militarily. As I say, we shouldn't go in militarily, but at least we're going to stand up and impose real costs on Russia. They're going to regret this. They're going to regret this with all of these sanctions we impose on them, with an opt-out for their biggest export, and we are giving them $700 million a day. So next time you see Joe Biden stand up, next time you see Boris Johnson stand up, next time you see the Chancellor of Germany stand up, Scholz, they'll say, we are being incredibly tough. They are giving Russia $700 million a day, $700 million a day, while they go into full, all-out war against Ukraine. Is this because they're evil? Potentially it's because there are some fossil fuel profiteers who didn't want to disrupt that trade. I'm sure that's going on. What's more significant here, though, is that Europe didn't plan for this. So again, as I say, Europe didn't encourage the Ukrainian government to make compromise with Russia. Europe said, as I talk about often in 2014, they said, no, Ukraine, don't have a deal which means you are sort of both absorbed within the European and the Russian sphere of influence. Come to us wholeheartedly. We want you to sign an exclusive deal with us. Implicitly, we'll protect you if something goes wrong. What do? They remain completely dependent on Russian gas, which means that Russia has all of this leverage. Even when Russia has now invaded Ukraine, we're giving them $700 million a day. I've got one more graph for you. This is the reliance that European countries have on Russian gas. So you can see here how various countries are dependent on Russian gas. So for Austria, Finland, and Lithuania, Russian imports make up 100% of total gas imports. You can see there on the right to what extent this impacts their entire energy system. The most important one here isn't the one that's at the top, it's Germany. They use gas to produce 27% of their energy, and almost 60% of that comes from Russia. So they're the biggest customer. Italy also a big deal because you can see there, it's another big country, of course. They get 31% of their energy from gas, and 40% of that gas, or 40% of that imported gas, from Russia. You have a situation where, we haven't known that exactly this was going to happen. I'd be a fool to say that, because I've been saying last week that there wouldn't be a full-scale invasion. I think probably what's happening is that Putin is trying to increase his bargaining power. Obviously, that's not what's happened. We're faced now with a full frontal imperialist war. But if you were going to talk tough like NATO do, like the EU do, then you should prepare to be able to protect your supposed ally when they are in their time of need. And what has happened? Europe has done nothing to wean itself off gas over the past decade. In fact, because Germany moved away from nuclear and because many countries have moved away from coal, rightly, of course, they're more reliant on gas than they were in 2014. So talk tough and then give the Russians $700 million a day. That's what we're looking at. What were the Russians doing while the Europeans were completely incapable of planning for any kind of situation like this? They were preparing. So you can see here on this graph, you've got the foreign debt of Russia and the international reserves of Russia. International reserves is basically your piles of cash in foreign currency, so the dollars that your central bank has. Now, as you can see, in 2014, so that was when there was the first conflict over Ukraine, when Russia annexed Crimea, their debts were way, way, way larger than their foreign exchange reserves. So their debts were right up there at 700 billion. Their foreign exchange reserves were below 500 billion. So you can see there, if the screw was turned on them financially then, it was a little bit, but not to the extent that we're claiming it is now. If the financial screw was turned on them then, they might have had to default. You know, that could have been very significant. Their debts outweigh their reserves. If they're not getting any new cash, then they're not going to be able to pay back those debts. The situation they're in now, their international reserves have massively increased and their foreign debt has massively decreased. So Russia has prepared for this situation. They are in a space where they think they can take whatever the West throws at them. If the West throws all of these financial sanctions at them, they can take that easily enough. They can continue. They've got their goal. Putin wants to control Ukraine. He's sitting on enough cash that he doesn't need to worry too much about sanctions. And most importantly, he's still getting foreign reserves. He doesn't just have to rely on this pile of foreign reserves because, as I've said, we're still sending Russia $700 million a day. And that's because Europe didn't prepare. Europe didn't wean itself off gas. Russia did. So while we talked tough and said we were Ukraine's friend and we'll defend you in your time of need, we weren't able to do any of that. And that's why I think if you're going to talk tough, if you're going to say don't compromise, you need to be able to back up those claims. And what I find, awful, the consequences are awful, is that the West has talked tough and it hasn't done the work that means it can now stick up for Ukraine. Obviously, I don't think that should be via military means because that would lead to World War III. But at the least we could have done is to have put ourselves in a position, in a situation where when Russia invades an ally, we're not sending them $700 million a day.